Today in our podcast, we're beginning to look at the book of Exodus. So we're going to move from Genesis to Exodus. There's a several hundred-year gap between the closing of Genesis and the opening of Exodus historically. And throughout that time, we find that a new king of Egypt, a new Pharaoh, has risen that didn't remember Joseph and the contributions he had made to rescue the world, really, at that time. Through that, he didn't remember the history of the Jewish people. But instead, this new Pharaoh now looks over at verse 9, and he sees that the sons of Israel, that are being called here, not the nation of Israel, they're not there yet. The sons of Israel are more mightier than we are, he says. They're growing. The population is booming. And they've been given this wonderful land, in the land of Goshen. And the pharaohs, who are always suspicious of conspiracies and so forth, were concerned that this group of Jewish people might one day unite with an enemy of theirs and turn against them. So something has to be done about this population explosion. So at this point, then, they decided just to put them to work. And many people believe a lot of the pyramids and different things were probably at least partly due to the efforts of the Jewish people. Verse 11, so they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor, perhaps thinking this would slow down their population growth, maybe even cause a lot of deaths. But instead, verse 12, the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied. It didn't seem to bother them, and they spread out all the more. So now the Egyptians are even getting more nervous about this growing population of the Jewish people, which takes place over a period of a number of years, matter of fact, centuries. So they gave them more hard work. Verse 14, they made their lives bitter with hard labor. So life is getting very oppressive for the Jewish people. They once were a favored people, given beautiful land for their pastures and so forth, favored by the pharaohs. They had Joseph on their team, but all that's gone. And now they are slaves to the Egyptian people, who are putting them under very heavy oppression to build their stuff, to handle what they want, but also to keep down the population of them, because they're afraid that they're going to eventually overtake the Egyptians, or at least unite with some common enemy against the Egyptians. And so that's a process going on here. In verse 15, as we move on, they decide they can't wipe them out through hard work, and they do need them because they're slaves. So, but maybe they can slow down the threat by getting rid of the sons, at least eliminating a lot of the newborn sons that are coming along at this time. So we have this picture in verse 15 where the king of Egypt spoke to the midwives, and there's two main midwives here. I'm sure there was an army of midwives, but these apparently are the leaders. And he said in verse 16, if a son is born, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. So I guess it was okay to have the daughters at this time, the women, but let's kill the sons so that we can slow down this population growth. And an army cannot be ultimately gathered and maintained and fought against us. But verse 17, the midwives feared God. They feared God more than they feared man. And so they let the boys live. They did not follow up on this issue. And of course, they didn't exactly tell the truth about this. When the Pharaoh got a hold of them and said, why are you letting these boys live? They simply said in verse 19, well, the Jewish women are not like the Egyptian women. They're more vigorous, and they give birth before the midwives can get to them. Well, that wasn't altogether a true story, I don't think, but God nevertheless blesses these women for obeying him in these difficult times. Verse 20, so God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. So they were blessed by God for obeying God rather than carrying out this atrocious attempt to eradicate the male population of the Jews, at least the babies. But the Pharaoh isn't done yet. So far, every scheme he's come up with has failed. So he goes directly to the Jewish people in verse 21. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So a very similar protocol, except now he tells the Jewish women themselves to throw their children into the Nile River to die there. Of course, the Egyptians worshiped the Nile. They believed a god ruled in the river there. And so these children are going to be thrown into the river and die. And of course, that didn't happen either. And that sets up, however, the storyline that begins in chapter 2 concerning Moses. And so now we're going to move into the next major character of Scripture, Moses himself. All this has been a setup going over many, many decades of time leading up to what God is going to do in chapter 2. So we'll pick up the life of Moses tomorrow.